My stepsister humiliated me in front of more than 200 guests at her wedding reception and called me just a nurse. But less than 10 minutes later, her father-in-law stood up, looked directly at me, and said something that made the entire room fall into complete silence and changed the way everyone saw me in that moment. My name is Jessica Carter. I am 35 years old, and I have been working as a nurse for several years. And what happened that night is something I never expected, especially not in a place where I was already trying my best to stay invisible. So before I tell you what really happened, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because this story might change the way you look at people around you. When I arrived at the reception hall, the event was already in full swing, and I could hear the soft, elegant music even before I stepped inside. The kind of music that instantly makes everything feel expensive and carefully designed, as if every small detail had been planned weeks in advance. As soon as I walked through the doors, warm golden lights filled the entire space, reflecting off crystal decorations and polished glass surfaces, while white flowers covered every table, creating a perfect image that looked almost unreal, like something taken straight out of a luxury wedding magazine. Guests were already seated in groups, laughing, talking, and enjoying themselves, dressed in expensive suits and shimmering dresses, with perfect hairstyles and confident expressions that made it clear they belonged in this kind of environment. While I quietly stood near the entrance for a few seconds, holding a small gift box in my hands, taking in everything from a distance. I had chosen to wear a simple dark blue dress for the evening, nothing expensive, nothing eye-catching, just something comfortable that would allow me to blend into the background, because I never really liked being the center of attention, especially not when it came to my stepsister. At the center of the room stood Olivia, my stepsister, wearing a bright white gown that seemed to glow under the lights, surrounded by people who were constantly talking to her, laughing with her, and praising how beautiful everything looked. And she stood there smiling confidently as if the entire night belonged to her, which in many ways it did. Olivia had always been like that. Even when we were younger, she needed attention. She needed people to notice her, admire her, and talk about her. And tonight she had everything she had ever wanted: the perfect wedding, the perfect guests, and the perfect image that she had always cared so much about. We grew up in the same house, but we never really lived the same life, because after my father passed away, my mother remarried Olivia's father, and from the outside it looked like a complete family, to daughters living under one roof. But inside, the reality was very different. Olivia grew up surrounded by comfort and luxury, going to private schools, wearing expensive clothes, and traveling to places I had only ever seen in pictures, while I learned to take care of myself from a very early age, working part-time jobs, managing my studies, and saving money wherever I could just to keep moving forward. I didn't complain about it, because that life taught me discipline and patience, and eventually led me to become a nurse, a profession that may not look impressive to everyone, but one that gave me something far more valuable than money or status, which was purpose and meaning. Being a nurse means standing beside people when they are at their weakest, helping them through pain, fear, and uncertainty. And over time, that kind of work changes you in ways that most people cannot see. But Olivia never understood that, because to her success was always something visible, something that could be measured through money, appearance, and social status. As I walked further into the hall, moving quietly between tables, a few relatives noticed me and gave polite smiles or small nods, while others didn't even look up from their conversations. And I didn't mind any of it, because I was used to being overlooked in spaces like this. I found an empty seat at the far end of a long table and sat down quietly, placing my gift beside me. And from there I could see the entire room clearly. Watching Olivia move from one group of guests to another, laughing loudly and speaking confidently, while her husband Daniel stayed close beside her, calmly introducing her to different people. For a while everything felt normal. The kind of calm that makes you believe the night will pass without any problems. As dinner service began and guests slowly returned to their seats, plates were placed in front of everyone, and the soft sound of cutlery and conversations filled the air once again. Then suddenly Olivia stood up from her chair, picked up a spoon, and tapped it lightly against her glass, creating a sharp ringing sound that spread across the entire hall and slowly brought all conversations to a stop. As every single person turned their attention toward her, she smiled confidently, clearly comfortable being the center of attention, and said that she wanted to introduce someone to Daniel's family. And then, without hesitation, she turned her head and looked directly at me, which immediately made my chest tighten because I knew that look very well. She called my name and asked me to come over. And even though I didn't want to, I knew refusing would only make the situation worse. So I stood up and walked toward her, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me with every step I took. When I reached her, she placed her hand on my shoulder in a way that looked friendly from the outside. But I knew it wasn't, because I had seen that same expression on her face many times before, and it was always followed by something uncomfortable. She turned toward the groom's family and introduced me as her stepsister, pausing just long enough to draw our attention. And then she laughed lightly and said that I was just a nurse, as if reducing my entire life and everything I had worked for into something small and insignificant. A few people at the table laughed quietly, some smiled politely, and others simply looked away. But the reaction, even though it wasn't loud, was enough to make the moment feel heavy, and I could feel that familiar embarrassment rising inside me, the kind that stays hidden behind a calm expression. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, and I didn't react, because I had learned a long time ago that responding to her only gives her what she wants. So I simply smiled and remained silent while the conversation slowly started again and people returned to the meals. For a moment, it felt like everything was going back to normal, like the moment had already passed and nothing else would happen. But just as I was about to step away, something unexpected changed the entire situation. Across the table, Daniel's father suddenly stopped eating, his movements slowing down before he completely froze, and then very slowly he placed his fork on the plate and leaned back in his chair while staring directly at me with a level of focus that immediately felt different from everyone else. His expression wasn't casual or polite. It was serious and thoughtful, like he was searching his memory for something important, and his eyes stayed fixed on my face as if he was trying to recognize me from somewhere he couldn't fully remember yet. Daniel noticed the change and asked if everything was all right. And although his father said that he was fine, his voice sounded distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely, still trying to connect something that hadn't fully come together. And in that moment, I realized that the way he was looking at me was not normal, because it wasn't curiosity or simple attention. It was recognition slowly forming. And that quiet shift in the air made it clear that this night was about to turn into something completely different from what anyone had expected. For the next few minutes, I sat frozen in my seat, my heart racing, because I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me, some curious, some confused, and a few still politely laughing at Olivia's earlier remark, completely unaware of the storm about to unfold. Daniel's father leaned forward slightly, his sharp silver eyes fixed on me as if the memory he was searching for was just on the tip of his tongue. And then, in a voice low but firm, he asked something that immediately drew the attention of everyone nearby, causing the room to quiet down once again and making it clear that what he was about to say was serious. Jessica, he said slowly, almost hesitantly, testing my name like it was connected to a memory he needed to verify. Were you working at St. Mary's Hospital 3 years ago? Asterisk, my heart skipped a beat, and I nodded carefully, because I remembered exactly where he was going with this, the memory slowly piecing itself together in my mind as I recalled the long nights, the chaos, and the emergency that had defined that period of my life. Asterisk, yes, I replied softly, trying to remain composed while realizing that this was the moment everything might change. Not just how they saw me tonight, but how my entire life's work might finally be recognized in a room full of people who had previously dismissed me. A hush fell over the table and even spread beyond to the nearby guests as he exhaled slowly, his voice thick with emotion. As he continued, I was in a terrible car accident that night, and the roads were blocked because of a massive protest downtown, which delayed nearly every doctor trying to get to the hospital. Many patients could have been lost if it weren't for someone who stayed with me the entire time, monitoring my breathing, checking my pulse, and talking to me so I wouldn't lose consciousness. Asterisk, all eyes turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, not with embarrassment this time, but with anticipation, because people were waiting for the confirmation of what he was implying. And I realized that for the first time tonight, no one was laughing or mocking, not even Olivia. Asterisk, he pointed gently in my direction and said, that nurse was Jessica Carter, and if she had walked away even for a second, I might not be sitting here today watching my son get married. Asterisk, Daniel's face went pale, his jaw tightening as he leaned back in his chair, struggling to process the realization that his father had survived because of a stranger who had stayed when almost everyone else could not, and the room went utterly silent, every guest frozen as the magnitude of the statement sank in. Asterisk, I shook my head slightly, trying to explain I was just doing my job. But his father immediately interrupted me with a firmness I had never heard before, shaking his head slowly. Asterisk, no, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. You did much more than that. You saved a life, and that is worth far more than anyone realizes. And yet, my daughter-in-law introduced you tonight as just a nurse, ignoring everything that you did, everything you sacrificed, and everything that mattered. Asterisk, at that moment, Olivia's face turned pale, the confident mask she had worn all evening slipping slightly as she realized that the room, which had been filled with polite smiles and dismissive laughter minutes ago, was now completely focused on me, watching as the truth emerged in its most raw and undeniable form. Asterisk, Daniel stood up slowly, walking toward me with his hand extended, his voice sincere. Thank you, Jessica, I mean it. I don't know what else to say, but we all owe you more than words can express. Asterisk, even the guests who had initially chuckled politely at Olivia's comment now whispered among themselves, exchanging glances of shock and admiration, as they finally understood the difference between empty words and real actions, between appearances and meaningful impact, and the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that was almost palpable, heavy with respect and gratitude. Asterisk, his father looked directly at Olivia, his warmth replaced by a quiet but undeniable disappointment, saying firmly, you introduced her as just a nurse. Someone who saves lives cannot be described so lightly, and you should have known better than to reduce her worth with your words. Asterisk, Olivia's earlier arrogance dissolved, and for the first time that evening, she had nothing to say. Her lips pressed into a thin line, unable to muster a defense, while I remained seated, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment, relief, and vindication as the room continued to focus on me, listening intently to every word that revealed the gravity of what I had done. Asterisk, the band began playing softly again in the background, but the energy of the reception had changed completely. Conversations were quieter, laughter more subdued, and a sense of reverence had settled over the tables as guests reflected on what they had just witnessed. Asterisk, Daniel's father continued, his voice filled with gratitude and emotion. If it wasn't for Jessica, I wouldn't be here to see my son married tonight. and we all owe her more than I can ever express. Remember this, never underestimate someone because of their job. Because sometimes the people you overlook are the ones who make the biggest difference in your life. Asterisk, even Olivia avoided looking directly at me for the rest of the night, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found, as the room slowly returned to dancing and laughter, but now with a subtle shift. A new awareness among the guests that true value does not always come from wealth, status, or appearance, but often from quiet, selfless acts that remain unseen until the right moment reveals them. Asterisk, as I sat back in my chair, a mix of emotions washed over me, from disbelief at the sudden attention to gratitude for being acknowledged in such a profound way. And I realized that for the first time, my life, my work, and my choices have finally been recognized for what they truly were. And in that moment, I understood the power of humility, perseverance, and quiet strength. Asterisk, before I finish this story, I want to remind everyone watching that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who appear ordinary at first glance. And if you like this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because moments like this deserve to be shared and remembered. Asterisk, and finally, as the night went on, guests raised their glasses to toast the bride and groom, but I noticed subtle nods and quiet smiles in my direction, the kind of recognition that isn't loud or boastful, but is far more powerful, because it comes from understanding, respect, and genuine gratitude. And in that moment, I knew that no one would ever think of me as just a nurse again, because tonight, my actions spoke louder than any words ever could, and the truth had finally been seen by everyone in the room. As the evening progressed, I remained seated for a few moments longer, watching the room transform from polite small talk and laughter into something far more meaningful. A subtle but undeniable recognition of the quiet courage and dedication that often goes unnoticed in our everyday lives, because the moment had shifted, and everyone could feel it in the air. Asterisk, Olivia, once the center of attention, now moved through the room with a subdued smile, her earlier confidence replaced with a gentle humility that I had never seen before. And it was strange, but also satisfying to notice that her presence no longer commanded the same awe or laughter, because the narrative had changed, and the truth about the night belonged to someone else entirely. Asterisk, Daniel approached me again, this time with a slightly softer smile, leaning close to say quietly, I hope you know how much everyone here respects you, not just for what you did, but for who you are and the way you carry yourself even when no one notices. I nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected, a deep sense of validation that comes not from money, status, or applause, but from the realization that your efforts and your values truly matter. Asterisk, throughout the night, various guests came by to offer quiet congratulations, some whispering apologies for their earlier judgment, others sharing stories of how they had overlooked people around them in their own lives. And I realized that this one moment had shifted perspectives far beyond just Olivia and her family, creating a ripple of awareness that was both humbling and powerful. Asterisk, even Daniel's younger cousins, who had barely paid attention before, now looked at me with curiosity and genuine admiration, asking questions about my work, what it takes to be a nurse, and how I managed to stay calm under extreme pressure. And I smiled, answering honestly, because these questions reminded me why I chose this life, and that sometimes the most meaningful impact is invisible until the right moment reveals it. Asterisk, as I reflected on everything that had just happened, I thought about my journey, the long years of study, the late nights at the hospital, the countless patients I had cared for, and the moments when no one thanked me, no one noticed, no one believed it mattered. And yet, all of that hard work and dedication culminated tonight in a single moment of recognition that was worth far more than any accolade or social status could ever provide. Asterisk, Daniel's father returned to the table, sitting beside me for a few quiet moments, and he said softly, "Jessica, it is rare to meet someone who embodies not just skill, but heart, compassion, and courage. And tonight you reminded us all that true worth isn't measured by appearances, titles, or wealth, but by the lives you touch and the difference you make when no one is watching." Even Olivia seemed to internalize his words, glancing at me from across the room, no longer attempting to compete or mock. And for the first time I saw a moment of genuine understanding in her eyes, an acknowledgement that she had misjudged someone she had grown up with, and that humility, the quiet, could be far more powerful than arrogance ever could. The reception slowly returned to its original rhythm, music filling the hall, laughter echoing, guests dancing and toasting. Yet the atmosphere had subtly transformed, carrying with it a sense of awareness that lingered like a quiet hum beneath the surface, reminding everyone present that the night had revealed more than just a marriage, but a truth about respect, empathy, and the unseen strength in ordinary lives. Before the evening came to an end, Daniel approached me one last time, extending a hand not for formalities, but as a gesture of sincere gratitude, and said, "I hope you know, Jessica, that what you've done will never be forgotten by anyone in this room, and we are all better for witnessing it." I nodded, touched by the weight of his words, and realized that even though I had always considered my work ordinary, tonight it had become extraordinary in the eyes of those who had once overlooked me. As the night concluded, I stood near the exit, observing the guests leaving, the soft evening light streaming through the windows, and I reflected on the entire experience, realizing that the quiet moments of patience, diligence, and care often lead to the most powerful forms of recognition, and that sometimes the loudest lessons in life do not come from confrontation, revenge, or grand gestures, but from truth quietly revealed at the perfect moment. To everyone watching, remember this: no matter what anyone tells you about your worth, your profession, or your contributions, never underestimate the impact of your dedication, kindness, and courage, because those are the qualities that will ultimately define how the world sees you, often in ways you never expect. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and comment below where you are watching from, because sharing stories like this reminds us all to value the quiet heroes in our lives, and to never dismiss someone based on appearances or job titles. And finally, as I walked out of that reception hall that night, I felt a profound sense of closure and recognition, knowing that I had been seen for who I truly was, not as the quiet stepsister in a simple dress, not as just a nurse, but as someone whose actions and dedication had mattered in ways that would never be forgotten, and that the truth, when revealed, always speaks louder than the judgments or assumptions of others. So never doubt the power of your quiet strength. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. And remember that the moments you think go unnoticed may one day become the moments that change everything. Because life has a way of revealing the importance of your choices, your courage, and your heart in the most unexpected and unforgettable ways.